Hey there, listener. Corey Andrew Powell here, and I'm excited to share that Motivational Mondays is now sponsored by BetterHelp. Feeling stressed or anxious? Well, BetterHelp brings you online therapy that's convenient and affordable. NSLS members get 50% off your first month of BetterHelp when you sign up at betterhelp.com/NSLS or click the link in the show notes. Start your journey to better mental health today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Motivational Mondays. I'm your host, Corey Andrew Powell, and today we're going to be celebrating Giving Tuesday with a Heartfelt Rewind compilation episode. Now, this is a day dedicated to generosity and kindness and the spirit of giving back to our communities and society overall. To honor this occasion, we've curated some of the most inspiring moments from past interviews with guests whose philanthropic endeavors and humanitarian contributions truly exemplify the essence of giving. First up, Tom Dary's Advocacy for Autism Inclusivity.
My family started Rising Tide with the goal of employing people with autism and trying to get as many people with autism jobs as we possibly could, because my brother Andrew has autism. And, we saw from a really early age that in order for him to lead the full adult life that we knew he was capable of, we were going to have to step up and take action. We've been doing this now for about a decade, and we've learned somewhere along the way that most of what we do, if not all of what we do, to effectively support our employees with autism aren't really solving autism problems. They're really solving business problems, because our employees with autism have the same needs as anybody else. Just in some cases, they're a little bit more apparent. So it allows us to do a better job of designing systems and processes that are more inclusive and work better for everyone who would use them. And we really wanted to share those learnings, things around hiring, around structuring the workplace, around making things clear, around developing people, around working with people who are struggling, and really get those messages out to small, medium-sized business leaders, because we felt it would really help those organizations better attract talent, better differentiate their brands, as well as hopefully provide a lot more jobs for people with autism.
I think what's great about that from a leadership standpoint is the idea of it began with a personal matter, your family. And now it's a movement almost to facilitate helping a demographic of society that is often, I guess, maybe ostracized, just not thought of as a viable person in the workforce. So when it comes to the persuasion that you've had to implement, if you will, to organizations and businesses to get them on board, I mean, has that been difficult, or was it something that they were waiting to do and they were like, oh, we've been waiting for a program like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's some companies that, certainly there are other organizations than just us that are taking up the lead on employing people with autism. There's large companies like Microsoft and SAP and other purposefully built organizations like us, like Ultranauts and Biddy and Bo's coffee shops and John's Crazy Socks. There's a lot of other folks. But what we find a lot when we talk to business leaders is that they're hungry for talent, right? A lot of these organizations really struggle to find great employees, especially at the entry-level roles. And they likely, and most of the time, have never really thought about employing individuals with autism. And the first types of things that we hear when that starts to noodle around for them is, well, what if we fail? What if we, try to employ someone with autism and we have to fire them, because that's really scary, right? That's like one of I think the last things that people want to do
in general, right?
In general, let alone somebody who maybe this is their only or one of very few job opportunities that they have out there. So I think a lot of it is kind of being able to break down that stigma and offer a way to do it where it's not just like charity focus, where it's like, I'm doing this as a good thing, because it's really a better business strategy. So, I think what we try to tell employers is the first thing is, one, really try to design a hiring process that's objective. So we have real concrete measures around what somebody needs to be successful in a role. So for our entry-level car wash roles, somebody has to be able to do our interior cleaning process 3 times in a row under 7 minutes in order to get a job. If they can do that, we have pretty high confidence that they're going to be able to be successful in that job. And that allows us to evaluate people who, on the surface might not interview particularly well. They may not look you in the eye. They may not have great verbal communication skills. They may have some stims or whatnot, and that makes them look different. But you put them into this same kind of fair and standardized evaluation process, and a lot of times someone who may not be able to communicate with you much at all will really surprise you. We just actually recently hired a young man who is both deaf and autistic, and we were really like, how is this going to work? Ourselves, like, is he going to be able to do this? But we put him through the same process, and he's great. He's able to read lips well enough and understand like whatever gestures our managers do. One of our managers can sign a bit, but for the most part, not really able to sign. But because we have like lots of visual supports in the workplace, color coding, and it's we're able to teach things in a few different ways. He's doing a fantastic job, and this is someone who I think on the surface you would have never thought could keep up on a day where we might wash 1,000 cars, and this guy is killing it. So, it starts, I think, with objective hiring, and then being able to have training procedures that are going to really easily quantify if someone can be capable of doing a role. And then I think there's a lot of the risk there that people fear is mitigated.
Next up, we've got Pam Cusick, who's a passionate advocate for giving patients a voice. Pam's work ensures that every patient feels heard and empowered, and reminds us all of the importance of empathy and support in healthcare. I love, from the leadership standpoint, one of the things that we always talk about here at the NSLS to young college students, or even non-traditional students or professionals out in the working world, is that very often the greatest opportunities are where you find there is an opportunity, right? There's something that's not being serviced, or there's some area or a demographic that's not provided with a need. And so I know there's a part of your work also deals with underrepresented communities. So I am wondering, like, do you find that in that particular segment of the business, there's even less or fewer opportunities for people in underrepresented communities to be heard? So there's like a disparity, or is it equal that no one's listening to anybody, and so you had to kind of help everybody across the board? Or is it a little bit of both? I don't know.
Well, it kind of depends. So yeah, we need to help everybody be able to share their voice and be heard. And more organizations are looking to do that. So that's a positive. In terms of underrepresented communities, there are certainly different feelings about research in specific communities. There's a bit of distrust among, some groups. The interesting thing, we have a lot of women who are great at responding. Men are not as great at responding to research requests. I don't know if they sign up, but they're not as excited to participate, or don't really want to, get to the touchy feely of their why and all that other stuff. I don't know, but I don't really have an answer for that. But they're not as the response rate among men is not as great as it is among women, for research. But we do endeavor to find people who are in underrepresented communities, and that's becoming a bigger ask. When clients come to us, they will be looking for, specific subgroups of people within, whatever the disease area is. Pick one, hemophilia, and they want to, make sure that there are different genders represented, different ethnicities represented. And so we make, an effort to identify those people who are already in our community. We have I don't think I said this, 145,000 patients and caregivers who've signed up with us across 1,500 conditions. So we do have, a fairly good diversity. One of the areas that is not as well represented in research is the disability community.
Mm.
So, ensuring that you include people with mobility issues, hearing loss, vision loss, chronic pain, all of these things, depending on the product or service you're creating, impact people in a different way. And so getting the voice of those different groups is also important. So
Mm.
there are a lot of different ways to kind of, I guess, parse the information and who you're trying to bring in, but
Yeah.
you have to be very intentional about it. Because if
Yeah.
you just sort of throw out an invitation, you'll get the people who respond most. So, some women and this is our experience,
Right. Right.
but you might not find, an older population or
Mm.
a younger you know what I mean? It depends what you're looking
Right.
for. So you have to make the effort to look for those patients and intentionally invite them in to
Hmm.
be part of the research. And I think that's becoming more of a something that we're asked for more often now, because there is a light being shown on DEI and making sure that we are, when we present research results, or our clients do, that it has included different groups and different points of view.
I'm really happy you brought up the DEI conversation because obviously right now that's a big political hot point. And I
Mhm.
mean, like within the last 24 to 48 hours, there's been headlines about DE&I initiatives being completely dismantled across various organizations or universities. And I'm glad you brought up DE&I in your line of work because people are often forgetting that we're not talking about just race and ethnicity.
Mhm.
DEI is inclusivity of people with disabilities, physical challenges and body limitations.
Mhm.
And so to just broadly get rid of DEI is, I mean, I said I'm not going to get political, but uh, it's completely negligent, though. It really is because it's not a broad stroke. It's a lot of things under that umbrella. So that was a little bit of a disconcerting thing to see that, with the stroke of a pen, just whoosh, no more DE and I. I'm like, well, wait, there's a whole lot of stuff under that umbrella.
It's interesting because while that is happening in some sectors, we're seeing an increase in the interest. And I just had two calls today, prior to our call, that were focused on making sure that there is more inclusivity in clinical trials.
Okay.
So, there are efforts underway where they may be ending in some areas. It's really becoming a bigger concern, where we see our clients making an effort to identify and invite patients who are from different races, different socioeconomic groups, disability groups, making sure that those voices are included. Because when you look at a product that you're trying to bring to market, it's not just one subgroup that's going to purchase it. You
Mm.
want to, make sure your messaging appeals to people across a variety of groups, whether that be ethnicities, whether it be a disability. Every people have a different way of interpreting things, and you want to make sure you're addressing that in a way that you are going to reach the broadest number of people. You're going to communicate effectively with them and invite them to use your product, test your product, buy your product, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, but not including those voices in the early development and in the marketing of those things, you lose a whole sector. I mean,
Mm.
with disabilities, as an example, 25% of the world's population has some sort of a disability.
Mm.
That's 25% of people who could, you know, use your product, buy your
Hmm.
product, talk to their doctor about their whatever it is.
Right.
So it's a big number. And so when we exclude those people from anything, whether it be education, as you were mentioning, or research in a broad sense, you're losing that opportunity to communicate with a larger group.
Next, Dr. Cynthia Hickman shares invaluable insights on caregiving for the elderly and the essential leadership skills needed in this compassionate field. Dr. Hickman's dedication to elder care highlights the critical role of love and patience in an aging society. So your first book, was that one basically about the story of you taking care of your mother, and I think that was the one called
Daughter,
from the
nurse,
lens of daughter,
caregiver.
nurse, and caregiver.
Yeah,
Right.
the journey of duty and honor. That one was from the journey of taking care of my mom. And I actually wanted her to be a part of that book, Corey. And every time I started it, I couldn't get going. And of course, after she died, I found out, got in my ear, I couldn't write it until the end of the story had occurred. And then I wrote it backwards. I had to write the most difficult part of it first in order to get to the fun part so people can know a caregiving journey was arduous at times, but there was fun in it. And mom did crazy things, while she was with us. And I shared a story when I was working on my PhD. My mother was an educator, and I worked real hard to keep her fine motor skills, gross motor skills, vision intact. So I gave her my chapter 3 when I was working on my dissertation with a red pen. It's actually in the book.
Oh goodness,
When
she must have had a
she
field
got
day.
done with that chapter, I said, and I thought it was so good, and I made sure I had everything correct. When she got done with that chapter, Corey, I said, Mom, thanks. You won't get another chapter.
Exactly. As we call it, she bled all over the paper, honey.
Oh
She
my goodness. But it was
Yeah.
one of those things where I was trying to do things that add her in it. But because God didn't want it that way, I wrote it after she passed, which was the way that helped me grieve because I was her caregiver, I was her advocate for the business side as well as the medical side. I didn't have time to grieve. And so writing that book helped me kind of release what I was on the inside because I was everything to everybody. The grandkids, the siblings, everybody was falling on the chair, flipping over chairs. I'm like, okay, let me stay calm because I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to contact this person, that person. So it was a while before I grieved. And so when I crashed and burned, the book helped me get myself back on track and recognize that I needed to share the journey with others in hopes that they don't end up where I ended up.
I love that you answered that question because I literally have a question here and you already answered it. My question was going to be to you. I wondered after going through such a difficult thing as that, what prompted you to relive it and want to rewrite it because that's such a deeply personal story. But you just shared it's part of the advocacy because through that experience you're telling readers what to potentially expect,
right,
and maybe how to address certain things. Like even when it comes to one thing I love you talk about is the importance of educating yourself on some of the healthcare situations that could arise in the healthcare system or the hospital. So talk a little bit about that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because what happens is when you think caregiving, Corey, people think the physical side of caregiving only. But the person has something going on where they need to have care from the medical side. And most people aren't versed in that. What they look at is the bathing, the bathing, the bathing, the clothing, going to bed, giving them medicines and all that. But you have to really realize why this person now needs care. In the case of my mom, she ended up with heart failure. But thank God I worked in heart failure for over 20 years. So my mother did not have a hospitalization from heart failure because I knew what to do. I knew the medications. I knew she had to be weighed based on weight. You determine medicines and all that. But most people just do the physical side. Give them their bath, comb their hair, sit them in the chair. But what if someone has a medical condition that you're not familiar with? You must educate yourself because in your quest to do good, you could actually injure someone. Good example, diabetes. We know it's an issue with the pancreas. It no longer works, and people now, their insulin is not working the way it should. So now they're either on PO medication for blood sugar compliance or insulin. But if you give them too much and too little, things could happen. If you're not paying attention to their skin, to their feet, to their skin folds, where a lot of times bacteria folds, which turns into infections. If they're not able to move about, they get bed sores and you don't understand why. If they're incontinent and you're not cleaning them appropriately, they get sores. That goes into a whole nother enchilada. So you have to also know a little bit about the health condition of your person because you could hurt them if you don't.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me because everything you're saying, I think so many families have gone through or will go through. as you were saying that story, I was again thinking of a personal family matter with my grandmother has been gone now maybe 20 something years of colon cancer that spread to her liver.
Mm,
And of course, when you're in your late 60s, you're not really on the transplant list, for a
right,
kidney, for an organ.
right.
But the way we realized something was wrong was because my mother would go over there a lot. And then she one day noticed, she said, she noticed that my grandmother's eyes were not
Yellow.
clear.
Yeah,
They were yellow.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's where it began. And she said,
Mhm,
your eyes don't look clear, Mom.
mhm.
What's going on? And she said, no, I'm fine. And she said, no, I'm not saying how you feel. You don't look right. And my mom really then paid closer attention and she
Right.
noticed a protrusion
Ah,
in the lower belly. And
wow.
she said, Mom, what is this?
Her liver
Because we
was.
thought she was going to the hospital a lot, like normal.
Mhm.
She was supposedly going, and she was, but somehow doctors didn't notice. And my grandmother said, "Oh, that's from having 5 children." My mom's like, "Yeah, you had us like 40 years ago, though.
There's no
There
babies
should be
right there anymore.
right, like there's no way that's." But like to your point earlier, the older generation, oh, I'm fine.
Yep.
No, everything's okay.
Yeah.
And so you really have to look after the elders in many cases because they are from a different time. They don't want to talk
Mhm.
about it. So long story short, it ended up being that protrusion was
Liver. Yeah.
liver that had been inflamed and
Right.
enlarged because it had cancer. So if you get nothing else from this, everyone who's listening and watching and taking Dr. Hickman's advice, just pay
Pay
attention.
attention.
Next, we revisit Carly Broderick's episode. Carly is redefining gender norms and making strides in creating inclusive environments for all. Carly's commitment to using her personal care brand to break barriers and foster acceptance is nothing short of inspirational.
In many ways, I feel like my entire career has led me to this point of founding Miles. I've always been in consumer-facing industries. I worked at Universal Studios in marketing in their consumer products group as the licensor, working with licensees, selling into retail. I, of course, spent 10 years at Target. I was a consultant with small brands and retailers, and then most recently spent 3.5 years as the chief operating officer of a commerce agency called The Stable that worked with emerging and mid-sized brands. And always wanted to start my own consumer brand ever since I left business school, but never had what I thought was going to be a breakthrough enough idea to survive in a very crowded marketplace until I had the idea for Miles. And what happened was it was early COVID, the spring of 2020. And my son at the time was in fourth grade. And we were in lockdown and figuring out what remote learning looked like. And in public schools in Minnesota, in fourth grade, you start to get health education about your body and how your body is going to change through puberty. Only because we were figuring out remote learning, he got that at home with me, with
Mm-hmm.
the school sent home. So he and I were going through the puberty curriculum, and it got me thinking, gosh, he's going to need deodorant pretty soon. Like, what will I get him? And I know the space probably too well from my professional background. And so I started cycling through, all the choices in the market and really started, discarding one after another for a few different reasons. But what really struck me was, gosh, there's no go-to personal care brand in this space for these teens and tweens at a very critical time in their life. Going through puberty is certainly an adventure, both for parents as well as the kids.
Yeah.
There's a lot of changes. And also, it just struck me that, especially through the pandemic, just teens are more anxious, feeling lonely, or feeling less self-confident than ever for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't it be great if there was just a brand that they can count on to take care of their hygiene needs that they felt was built just for them so that they could get on, living their best day as their best self. And so
Yeah.
that's really where I conceived of the idea for Miles as a personal care brand for all genders. Really, when you look at the formulations behind deodorants and antiperspirants, they're traditionally merchandised in bricks and mortar retail as like the men's aisle and the women's aisle. But when
Mm-hmm.
you look at the ingredients and you start to dig into the formulation, there's nothing really gender specific about the formulations. It's all scent preference and marketing.
Right.
So I saw an opportunity to just build this brand that was truly inclusive and not tied to some of the stereotypical gender roles that were being portrayed.
As you were telling that story about how you evolved with this brand, I could not help but to think about My mother raised me as a single mom.
Mhm.
And there's that dynamic of like as a mom, like how do I talk to my son about his body? Because I don't have the same parts, And so how could I maybe get his uncle involved or, whatever. But I remember I used to love her cream secret deodorant as a
Yes.
kid. But I was like also ashamed because the commercial were like strong enough for a man, but made for a woman. So you're right, like early
Yes.
on, I'm getting like that signal of like, well, is this a bad thing? I like it though, but do I hide my face when I buy it because it's for a woman, but it smells great and it stops my stops my perspiration. So I didn't even realize I had that angst until just now. So you helped me work out some unresolved trauma,
Well,
apparently.
I am happy to do so. And I love that you loved the smell of Secret because it is so much about scent preference and like what, smells good to each of us. All of our, makeups are so different. And even the marketing around some of those brands, like I love that you just remembered the tagline, strong enough for a man, but made for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going through this journey and looking at different marketing, there's a lot of the legacy brands on the quote unquote men's side of the aisle always portray men the same way. You're physically strong, you're emotionally stoic, you're
Hmm.
going to work in a button down and your dress pants. You're working out at the gym, but like not every man is like that. Not every boy is like that. It really
Mm-hmm.
got me thinking like, gosh, if you're not like the athletic kid, what is the choice
What do you
for
do?
the actor or the musician or the scientist or the entrepreneur?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where are those marketing messages?
Yeah.
And
The
so
art kids, all of us kids that were in Glee Club and stuff. We were a little
absolutely.
different. We were a little different. And finally, we'll revisit our conversation with Adam Lowy, who's tackling the crisis of food insecurity in America. Adam's innovative solutions and relentless drive to ensure that no one goes hungry underscore the transformative power of collective action.
Yeah, I mean, food insecurity is a huge problem here. I mean, I know you mentioned 1 in 6 kids, but it touches every single population. I mean, you look at veterans, LGBTQ populations, African Americans face hunger at twice the rate of their Caucasian, non-Latino counterparts. And then when you think about food waste, we're literally throwing away perfectly good edible food all the time. And for kind of silly reasons, if you think about it. I mean, if you go to the grocery store, I mean, the example I like to give a lot of the time is you look at the dates: best by, use by, sell by, expires on. Like all of it's kind of nonsense if you really think about it. Food doesn't follow a date label. Food has a biological, way of going bad or spoiling, and then reducing methane, which is a pretty potent greenhouse gas emission. In fact, food waste is the number two, emitter of methane gases. And we should not be wasting this amount of food while so many are struggling. So we really started Move for Hunger is just this way to say, hey, don't waste your food, especially if it's unopened. We've got a really easy way to get it to people in need. And that's kind of how we got started here.
Yes, and I love this other part of the story because this is kind of interesting. It reminded me of like how you came up with the idea, like working for your parents, your family's moving company, and coming up with this idea. It was like Shark Tank when I thought about it. It's like 'cause I'm always trying to figure out what is like right in front of my face, right in front of my eyes, and I haven't figured out that thing. And so you were working for your family's moving company and you realized how much food was being left behind when families are relocating. So I would love for you to share like when you had that epiphany and that like that Oprah aha moment, as you would call it, that came to you. It's amazing, really.
Yeah, you know what? We've all moved at this point, and people throw away all sorts of stuff: food, clothing, furniture. It was the perfectly good, unopened, non-perishable food that was getting left in the pantry. And honestly, customers were asking, what should I do with this? They were feeling guilty about it. So it started as like this way to solve this problem that you see the customer having. And like any good business, right? Like you should be solving problems and providing better service to the customer. But it also felt like this just really nice thing to do, right? We were a moving company. We were in the home anyway. We'll pick the food up. We'll bring it to the food bank. The food bank was down the street. Like it wasn't going to cost us much, but the reaction from the customer was like, oh my God, I can donate my food and it's not going to cost me anything. You've now solved me a problem, right? And on top of that, I get to feel good because I know that I'm feeding somebody in the community. In our first month, we collected 300 pounds of food.
Wow.
And I visited my local food bank. And that's where I learned that, there were more than 100,000 people in my county that didn't have enough to eat. And if you look around Monmouth County, New Jersey, you do not see poverty or homelessness or all the stereotypical attributes that you think about when you think about hunger. But it exists here as it exists in every community. And education, having my eyes opened was kind of like that first step in saying, we should do more and others can do more. I knew nothing about nonprofits at all. And, if you'd asked me 13 years ago if I'd be running a nonprofit, I would have told you you're out of your mind. But as I've, dove into this industry, I've really learned that nonprofits are about problem solving. And the best way to do that is to leverage resources that already exist. Mm-hmm. So with the moving industry, you've got trucks and drivers and warehouses. And if you look at the food banking industry, they've got trucks and drivers and warehouses and a lot of the same struggles. And what we did was take this industry and put them to work. And today we've got 1,100 movers across the US and Canada that are recovering food as part of their operations. They're making food recovery business as usual to feed the communities they serve.
I hope you all were inspired by these remarkable individuals. Their stories remind us that giving comes in many forms, and together we can make a difference in the lives of others. Thank you for joining us on this special Giving Tuesday episode of Motivational Mondays. Now let's go out there and spread the love and keep the spirit of giving alive.